So, do you think that you can change the circuits in your brain by thinking about it? Do you? So they did this experiment a little ways back. They took these people who never played the piano before. You guys with me? And they separated them into 4 categories, and they said, listen, we're going to scan your brains before you learn these exercises, and then we're going to scan your brain after. And all you have to do is show up for 2 hours a day in practice for 2 weeks. Okay? And just follow the instructions. And we're going to hook your brain up to these sophisticated scans, and we're going to see what happens before and after. So they got with these people, and they said, okay, first group, here's the scales and here's the chords. They're one-handed exercises. Practice them over and over again. Keep playing them. So they played every single day, 2 hours a day for 2 weeks. They scanned their brains before, they scanned their brains after. After 2 weeks, guess what happened? Whole new set of circuits lit up in their brain that never lit up before. That makes sense. You learn something new. Learning is making new connections. Repeating it over and over again is sustaining or maintaining those connections, and that's called memory. So they memorized what they were doing by physically practicing or personalizing what they learned. Make sense? Standard, simple. They took the second group of people and they said, listen, we want you to play 2 hours a day for 2 weeks. We're going to scan your brain before and after, but you know what we're going to do? We're not going to tell you how to play anything. You just come and do whatever you want. Play whatever you want. So at the end of 2 weeks, guess what happened to them? Nothing. You know why? Because they couldn't remember what they had learned the day before. And they couldn't remember what they played the day before, and they had no structure. They got no instruction and no knowledge to be able to apply it to make some steady circuits. Still with me? Make sense? Took the third group of people, they said, listen, don't even show up. Don't even create your day. Same thing. Nothing happens. Last group of people, they said, listen, we want you to come 2 hours a day for 2 weeks. We're going to show you these one-handed exercises. But instead of you physically playing the piano, we want you to mentally rehearse over and over again those exercises. We know you're going to get tired, so we'll nudge you and we'll keep you awake, but you practice for 2 hours a day and you keep repeating those. At the end of 2 weeks, they rescanned their brain, and guess what happened? Same area of the brain lit up as if they were actually playing the scales. Now, you know what that means? They grew new circuits in their brain just by thinking about it. Just by thinking, just by rehearsing. Now, every time we learn something new, we make new circuits in the brain. If you learn anything new, learning is making a new connection in the brain, new neurological connection. Memory is maintaining or sustaining those connections, keeping them alive. And the only way that we maintain and sustain connections in the brain is by repetition. Repetition allows the neurons to develop a long-term relationship. So these people, every single day, made it the most important thing. They gave up their social engagements. They gave up television. They said, I'm going to mentally rehearse the greatest ideal of myself every single day. And as long as I keep doing it every day, what's going to happen to those circuits? They're going to light up and become the more sustainable circuits to act as a platform of who they will become in the future. Am I making sense? Now, the last thing that they had in common, which I find the most important, is that during this process of rehearsal, while they were sitting down rehearsing who they were going to be, just like the piano players, rehearsing over and over again, they had long moments where they lost track of time and space. In other words, they became so involved with what they were doing that when they opened their eyes or they lifted up their eye masks or when they turned the lights on in the room, it was 2 hours later and it only seemed like 5 minutes. They were so involved with what they were doing that they lost the feedback of the body, they lost the feedback from the environment, and they lost track of time. And the moment that that happens, geniuses, that's the moment we walk through the door to the quantum field. And that is the moment, by the way, according to neuroscience, that we repattern and rewire the brain. And by the way, guess what part of the brain is the most active when we do that? Frontal lobe, because isn't it true that we're making thought more real than anything else in that moment? And because the frontal lobe is the orchestra leader, it has its connections to the rest of the brain. And what it does is it quiets down the association centers, the thinking centers. It quiets down the motor centers. You don't want to move, you get still. It quiets down the emotional centers. And the only thing that's real is the thought. And when we capture that thought in the frontal lobe, when the frontal lobe captures it, as we hold that thought there, what happens is the rest of the neurons in the brain will pattern and make circuits to capture that thought and reflect it as a footprint of whatever we're focusing on. Does that make sense? Because it's as if we're experiencing it. And when we make new circuits in our brain, by the way, do you think that we'll perceive things that maybe already existed but we never really saw? Do you think that's possible? Do you think that the person who lives practicing being a victim every day gets good at it? Turn that on automatically? Yeah. Is it natural and second nature? And how will they perceive their world based on how they're wired? According to the law of a victim. Would you agree? Everything is a reason to suffer. Would you accept that? Simple quantum law, right? So if you made new circuits in your brain, do you think you may process or see things in your reality different because now you're wired to see them? Do you accept that? Yeah. So if I put up a picture of a Monet on the screen up here, and I said to you, isn't that a beautiful picture of what Monet painted? You guys would all say, oh yeah, that's beautiful. And then I took the picture down and I said, did you guys know anything about Monet? Do you know that he spent 44 years of his life teaching himself how to see things differently? And he thought that every person was too busy to stop and pay attention to light. And he loved light. He loved the light first thing in the morning, and he loved the light at sunset, at the twilight hour. And he said that the golden light of the twilight hour and the brightness and the opalescent light in the morning actually colored reality. And that he said, if I can capture this in my paintings and make things bright enough and capture light, maybe people will stop and look and see what they never pay attention to. And then he said, you know, the wisteria and the bridge are one and the same. I can't paint them separate. They're the same to me. And as he got older, he developed cataracts. And the cataracts were so thick that when he looked at the light, it diffused the patterns. So he began to more and more paint exactly what he was seeing. And the doctors urged him to have an operation, to do something to help him. And you know what he said? I worked too hard to see this way. Now, if I took that painting and I put it back up on the screen, would you see it differently? Would you agree that because you learned new knowledge and new information, you made new circuits to perceive what was already there, but you never paid attention to? Reality is the same way. How about the wine connoisseur? A 1992 Cabernet Sauvignon Silver Oak Alexander Valley. Good bottle of wine. You take that and you give it to the wine connoisseur and he lets it breathe. He knows about tannins, he knows about alcohol content, he knows about oaky flavors, He knows about grapes. He knows about age. He knows about aroma and sweetness. Do you think his brain is wired to perceive what wine is all about? Did he pay attention through knowledge long enough period of time to wire his brain to perceive subtleties in wine so that he would enjoy every single taste in that wine? You take the person who drinks the screw-off tops, you give him the 92 Cabernet, what happens? I don't taste any difference because he's not wired to. Do you understand? Reality is the same way. The reason that the movie is so great is because now you're paying attention to things that you normally never paid attention to. But do they exist all the time? Yeah. If the brain processes 400 billion bits of information every second, is it possible that we're missing some of reality? Yes. Is it true? Yes. So now, science used to say that the brain was hardwired, meaning that it was, wired so intently from genetics that you're going to be born a certain way, and then you're going to turn out just like your parents. And that's the end of the story. So it's a predetermined life, and get what you can in the process. And now what they're saying is, whoops, we lied. It's not true. You see, the brain is hardwired. There's certain definite areas that are hardwired because the human brain has been around for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years, whether you want to believe it or not. It's been around for millennia. And this process of learning has developed the brain. Now, when the sperm and the egg come together in utero, right around the 3rd month of life, the cells start to differentiate and we start to make neurons. And they start migrating north up to the skull. And then around the 6th month of life, we start making these connections. A neuron looks like an oak tree. But it's not big like an oak tree, it's tiny and it's flexible like cooked spaghetti and it's leafless. And it's 3-dimensional. And where neurons connect with other neurons, that's called a memory, something that we've learned. That's information being exchanged. Now, at the 3rd month of life, we make about 8,000 neurons per minute. At the 6th month of life, those neurons start making connections, and we make about 4 million connections a second, all the way through the time we're 2 years old. So the brain becomes this 3-dimensional tapestry of neurological connections. And what's being transferred... to the fetus is knowledge, pre-programmed connections, so that you can turn your head towards a sound, and you know what to do when you're sad, and you know what to do in case there's a threat or stress from your environment. So we have certain pre-wired patterns that have been shaped and developed from eons of trial and error. And one brain, human brain, looking next to another human brain looks almost exactly the same. As a matter of fact, if I took 2 brains and unscrewed your head and placed them side by side, you wouldn't really tell who was who, because the same folds and convolutions are similar from brain to brain. That's like your hand. Everybody's got a hand, right? It roughly looks the same. But then those intricate connections and patterns that form, those connections and circuits that form then, become the fingerprints of who we are. And we get specific traits, propensities, and characteristics that are inherent from our parents. And by the way, those are the things that they've learned. Those are the things that they've experienced. Those are the propensities and traits and emotional tendencies. So you may inherit your mother's insecurity and your father's anger. You may have your father's intelligence and your mother's creativity. But they're going to contribute their best. In other words, they're going to give the fetus, they're going to create a new being, and they're going to give to them what they've practiced the most. You understand? Now that's only, by the way, 50% of who we are. No one likes that, but it's true. It's 50%, that's it. The other 50% is up to us to begin to make our own circuits and our own connections. Now there's only two ways that we make connections in the brain. Only two ways. The first way we make connections in the brain is from knowledge that we gain, information, philosophy. Every time you learn something semantically new, every time you learn a new bit of information, you made a new connection. Did you guys make any connections today? So learning is making those connections. So it would be like if I handed you a book on how to ride a bicycle. And I said, read the whole entire book because I'm going to test you in 2 weeks. Know how to change a flat tire, know how to tighten the spokes, know how to shift gears, know how to brake, learn about this mystical thing called balance. And I'm going to test you in 2 weeks. And you would read that information and study it and repeat it till you did what? Repeated it enough till it was wired. Now it's being stored as a long-term memory. So that's philosophy, right? You're basically studying someone else's experience. And you are literally wiring your brain so that you can have that experience. Would you agree? Which, by the way, is the second way we make connections in the brain, is through experience. Experience is what enriches the brain. Now listen to this. Every time we experience something new, when we're experiencing it, all of our five senses are immersed in the process. What we're seeing and smelling and tasting and feeling and hearing, all of our five senses are picking up information from the environment and sending a rush of data back to the brain. And through these five pathways, this rush of data through five different ways causes neurons in the brain to fire and sting. And when they do that, they release these chemicals called neurotransmitters that make us feel a certain way. So the end product of an experience is called an emotion or a feeling. Still with me? So then, if an emotion or a feeling is the end product of an experience, then, if we keep experiencing the same emotions every day, what does that tell us? We're not having any new quantum law apply to that? As a matter of fact, if you keep your mind on those same emotions, by the law of the quantum realm, basically, we're putting our attention on something that we already know from the past. And what do we get? More of the same. So when we live by emotional propensities and emotional addictions, what we're really saying is, my observation is on something that's familiar to me based on the past, and I will keep observing it to keep it intact so that my future looks just like my past.